Well, hello and welcome back to our Bible study today on the book of Isaiah. Today we come to chapter 36. We're reading from the Common English Bible, and I am with the Reverend Nancy Springer again, and we're very
Hello.
glad to be able to walk through this study with you. So I'm going to invite Nancy. You're going to start us off reading.
All right, we begin with Isaiah chapter 36. Assyria's king, Sennacherib, marched against all of Judah's fortified cities and captured them in the 14th year of King Hezekiah. Assyria's king sent his field commander from Lachish together with a large army to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem. He stood at the water channel of the upper pool, which is on the road to the field where clothes are washed. Hilkiah's son Eliakim, who was the palace administrator, Shebna the secretary, and Asaph's son Joah the recorder went out with them. Then the field commander said to them, "Say to Hezekiah, Assyria's great king says this. Why do you feel so confident? Do you think that empty words are the same as good strategy and the strength to fight? Who are you trusting that you now rebel against me? It appears that you are trusting in a staff, Egypt, that's nothing but a broken reed. It will stab the hand of anyone who leans on it. That's all that Pharaoh, Egypt's king, is to anyone who trusts him. Now suppose you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God. Isn't he the one whose shrines and altars Hezekiah removed, telling Judah and Jerusalem, you must worship only at this altar? So now make a wager with my master, Assyria's king. I'll give you 2,000 horses if you can supply the riders. How will you drive back even the least important official among my master's servants when you are relying on Egypt for chariots and riders? What's more, do you think I've marched against this place to destroy it with the Lord's support? It was the Lord who told me, march against this land and destroy it.
Eliakim, Shebna, and Joah said to the field commander, "Please speak to your servants in Aramaic, because we understand it. Don't speak with us in Hebrew, because the people on the wall will hear it." The field commander said to them, "Did my master send me to speak these words just to you and your master, and not also to the men on the wall? They are the ones who will have to eat their dung and drink their urine along with you." Then the field commander stood up and shouted in Hebrew at the top of his voice, "Listen to the message of the great king, Assyria's king. The king says this: don't let Hezekiah lie to you. He won't be able to rescue you. Don't let Hezekiah persuade you to trust the Lord by saying, the Lord will certainly rescue us. This city won't be handed over to Assyria's king. Don't listen to Hezekiah, because this is what Assyria's king says: surrender to me and come out. Then each of you will eat from your own vine and fig tree and drink water from your own well until I come to take you to a land just like your land. It will be a land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards. Don't let Hezekiah fool you by saying, the Lord will rescue us. Did any of the other gods of the nations save their lands from the power of Assyria's king? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? Did they rescue Samaria from my power? Which one of the gods from those countries has rescued their land from my power? Will the Lord save Jerusalem from my power? But they kept quiet and didn't answer him with a single word, because King Hezekiah's command was, don't answer him. Hilkiah's son Eliakim, who was the palace administrator, Shebna, his secretary, and Asaph's son Joah, the recorder, came to Hezekiah with ripped clothes. They told him what the field commander had said. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So, Nancy, we've been reading prophecy for a number of weeks, and now we come to this historical section. Why and what is going on?
Well, what we think is going on is the need to ground all that Isaiah is saying in the history of God's people, right? This isn't just some guy talking at some random time, but it took place at a very specific point in history. And this narrative that we started today and will continue through the next few lessons is part of that grounding, right? All of what we call the Bible, all of our scripture, is the telling of God's story, of God's people. And so we have to kind of step into that, and this narrative helps us do that. Story is all about narrative. One of the things that brings to my mind is Bishop N.T. Wright talks about, when he talks about the authority of scripture, he uses an analogy of a 5-act play. And Act 1 is creation. Act 2 is the fall. Act 3 is all of Israel. So all of the Old Testament writings that we have. Act 4 is Jesus. And Act 5 begins with the book of Acts and goes through the epistles of the New Testament. And we are, in our day and age, 21st century North America and all of the world, living out, I guess it would be scene 3 of Act 5. And we're ad-libbing, but we're not ad-libbing ignorantly, right? We have all of this other narrative to keep us true to the play, to keep us true to the story, to inform who we are as God's people in our day and time, by reading about how the people of God interacted with their world thousands and thousands of years ago. So this is, am I right, David, in saying this is all about the 8th century BC?
Yeah, that's around the 700s. Yeah, that's about the right time.
Okay, all right. So what is your take on the narrative? What are you pulling from this?
This chapter, when we get to it, it's a big question as to, people have been writing papers about this. When was this put in? Was this something that was added after or in Isaiah's time, or after Isaiah died? Was this added by Isaiah himself, or was this added by somebody much, much later, after this document had been a document for hundreds of years, possibly already? And the point is that we, sitting on this side of history, have thoughts and theories as to that, but we don't know. What we do have is this as a complete text, as our inheritance. This is something given to us. And like what has been said by much wiser people than myself, is that the scripture is the what we need for salvation. So this scripture helps us as a whole to see something that God is trying to say to you and to me. And so this part of this book is important for that purpose, as it does help us to see something about what God is doing. So looking at that and understanding that itself, we see that in this time period, that this king of Assyria has sent his leader to come up to Jerusalem, which is the last holdout of all of Israel. And if we remember from our earlier history from the book of Joshua and Judges, that the city of Jerusalem was an incredible holdout, and the Jebusites held it for an incredibly long time, that this was their holdout. And so we know from just that piece of history alone that this is an incredibly well-fortified city, that an army is not easily going to take this over. And so when he talks about the soldiers on the wall having to eat their own dung and drink their own urine, they're recognizing that we can't take this city by force easily, and we're going to need to lay siege to this city. And so this siege is going to take years. This isn't something that's going to be simple, but it's going to be a long time. So with all of that in mind, we just understand that this is our inheritance, and it shows us the hope of God. So it gives context to the prophecies from beforehand about how Isaiah is writing about this time of lack of hope, of feeling like the world is at an end, of everything is being destroyed. We recognize why that is being viewed that way. And also from this same historical narrative, we begin to understand that Isaiah does have hope, but it's not in Hezekiah as a king. It's in something beyond Hezekiah.
Yeah.
And what are your feelings about Hezekiah? What do you remember anything about him?
Well, not honestly, not particularly right at this moment, but one of the things that just really sticks out for me in this passage is that, human nature doesn't change. The Assyrian king is sending his messengers to try to frighten and bully the one group of people that he cannot conquer, right? And so his ego is just really bruised and dented by this, and so he's trying to um, take the situation and manipulate it, and say, did any of the other gods save their people? Why do you think that Hezekiah is right in saying your God is going to save you? And just really instilling fear in them, and then letting that fear be what destroys them. And so we see that tactic played out in politics in this day and age all the time, right?
Absolutely. That line
And
in
so,
verse 14, the king says, don't let Hezekiah lie to you. He won't be able
yeah,
to rescue you. And
yeah,
it's propaganda. You're absolutely right.
right. And Hezekiah gave his team here the instructions of don't answer him, don't say anything back, just listen to what he has to say and tell me what he has to say, because Hezekiah knew it would be futile for them, right? And it would just make the Assyrian king even more angry. And so just take what he has to say and bring that back to me, so then we can make our plan. So Hezekiah was being the smart one in the group, in the pairings here. So, what do you tell us something about who Hezekiah was?
Well, Hezekiah was sort of a tragic king figure because he both had the hope and aspirations of greatness, and in the sense of following and knowing God, and at the same time often sort of had these fall short moments. Not like in the sense of David, who the Bible recognizes was a man after God's own heart, but had this different sense of, started to fall away, and then would have this act of falling upon God for support and help. And that's sort of Hezekiah's character. And so we see it very clearly in this as well, and that Hezekiah recognizes he can't save himself, that he's in this situation. So the only one who can save him is God. So Hezekiah once again does what he does and falls upon God, which, don't get me wrong, is a great strategy, falling upon God. However, I think we should all work to not get into that situation in the first place by following God regularly. And
right.
that's sort of the difficulty of Hezekiah's situation in life.
Yeah.
So
he was very human, right?
he was
Very
very
human.
human. Yes.
Somebody we can, he wasn't this elevated perfect king on a pedestal that none of us can truly aspire to be like. But in his human brokenness, we can kind of step alongside him and go, I get it. And I know how that feels. And we do get comfy in our own confidence and start doing things our way until we realize, right, that we've really messed things up and the only solution is God for us. And that's the story of the whole book of Judges, right?
Absolutely. And it comes from, again, that same issue that we were talking about before of this propaganda. God has given us the way to live. He gave Adam and Eve the way to live, right?
Right.
And from the beginning, God comes in and says something. This is who I am. This is who I've made you to be. Walk in this way. This is how I've designed the world, the universe. And so they do. And then, of course, right after God speaks, you have another voice come in right behind. It's sort of like, of course, when you're in kindergarten and you do something wrong, and perhaps you said something to somebody you shouldn't have, and then that person runs off to tell the teacher. What do? You run right behind them. So once they tell the teacher, you can then say, no, 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 that's not how it happened. Or you can put your own spin on it. And that's exactly what is happening here, where the person is saying, you've heard Hezekiah say, but don't listen to him. This is what's really going to happen. And in the Garden of Eden, you have God say to Adam and Eve, don't eat the apple. And of course, what does the serpent say right behind them?
Yeah. Did he really say that?
Exactly. Did he really say you'll die? And so that's the sense that we get. That's how the enemy works. And so it's hard for us as Christians to hear and discern the voice of the Spirit speaking, because there's always another voice right behind that voice trying to get us to second guess, trying to get us to not, or to stop, or to hedge our bets. And so it takes a lot of faith and a lot of courage to step forward and go in that direction. Just like it would have taken the people in Hezekiah's time here, his soldiers, a whole lot of faith to say, yeah, we are going to continue on in this direction. He's absolutely right. All the other nations have failed. All the other nations have fallen before the king of Assyria. Why on earth would Israel be any different? Is there any hope for us at all? And Hezekiah's message is, yes, because unlike those other nations, we serve a living God. And, it's that statement where somebody says to me, said to me once, the idea of, well, my God, wouldn't say that, right? My Jesus wouldn't say that, because they didn't like something that they'd heard in the Bible or something like that. My God wouldn't say that. And the answer is, you're right, your God wouldn't, because your God doesn't exist.
Right.
And that's the difference between these other gods of other nations and the God of Israel, is at the end of the day, the God of Israel is the living God, not an idol. And
not a God created in our image.
Absolutely. We are
God in whose image we are all created. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so that's an incredible thing. The second half to that, though, is it does come with a caveat or a concern. Just like, Peter in his great moment when Jesus asks him, who do you say that I am? Well, you are the Christ, you are the Son of the living God, right? Well, it's not long after that then Peter is trying to correct Jesus about something, and Jesus is saying, get behind me, Satan.
Right.
After our great
Remember who's supposed to follow who here.
Exactly. After our great successes, sometimes we get into the belief that that's how God will always work, or God will always operate. But that's not the sense of a living God. That would be, an inanimate object would always operate that way. Right. And so the people later on under prophets kept believing that God would save them. But the prophets would say, actually, no, God has said he's not going to come in this time to save you. He won't. And so you can't trust in him to do that, because he's told you he won't. So stop believing the false prophets who keep saying everything will be fine, because it won't be. And so that's the idea of the living God we serve.
Right. It is an ongoing, continuous relationship. And it's these narratives that we have through the Old Testament story of who God is, how we come to understand who God is as he interacts with his people, right? Helps inform and shape us, inform who we are as God's people in our day and our time.
Absolutely. And Nancy, I think that's probably the biggest thing we can take from this chapter, is this sense of us being informed by scripture, us being informed by what God's faithful people did before, but also recognizing the living God and the relationship part as well. And that just because God parted the sea and people walked across on dry ground, it doesn't mean when I walk up to a river or a lake and I look around and I'm too lazy to walk around it, I go, God, well, I guess you're going to part it now. No, that's not right. So similarly, when just because God's operated a certain way in the past doesn't mean he will in the future. but he will be true to his character and what he has said. And that's the truth of Scripture, the heart of Scripture. And so Hezekiah, in this narrative is clinging to that God will be true to God's character. And that is, I think, what we can take from this script, from this passage. It's what I take.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the message for all of us. So,
and so, is there anything, Nancy, that you would want to add to people reading this today or encountering this for the first time?
Just put yourself in the story, right? Be the person standing there with Jebna and Asaph, sons Joah, and all these hard to pronounce names, and be a part of it, and see what God has to say to you about who you are as God's child in this. So we'll have more of that as we go through the next 3 chapters, 38 or
yeah, 4 chapters.
39.
Yeah, and the great thing about this is it's going to set us up then for the next 26 chapters after that, and talking again about this hope that the people have and what is to come. And it's wonderful. So this sort of is a little bit of a pause from the prophecy of doom and destruction to the new hope that's coming.
Yeah. Looking forward from Act 3 to Act 4.
Absolutely. Okay, well, folks, thanks for joining us today. We're very glad to be able to do this study with you. And we hope that through this, that God has spoken something to you, refreshed his spirit in you, and his life that he's trying to share with you. Remember that we are all created in his image, and he does have a plan for you. And that's, again, what Scripture is constantly telling us. So
the plan is a hopeful future. Yeah.
Absolutely. So God bless you this day, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Bye.